Hey guys. Tonight we begin not in a castle, a warm hearth, or a king's hall, but in a tiny drafty hut, where the snow piles high outside and the wind cuts straight through the walls. It's the Middle Ages, when winter wasn't just cold, it was a test of ingenuity, endurance, and sometimes sheer stubbornness. Peasants faced frozen fields, meager food, and nights so long that hope itself seemed to wane. The world is harsh, silent, and survival meant making warmth, shelter, and scraps of food stretch farther than seems humanly possible. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Let the soft hum of the night wrap around you. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and drift into a frozen world where every day is a battle to stay alive. Congratulations! You've just stepped into a medieval winter, and surviving it is no small feat. The first thing you notice isn't the snow. It's the smell. You'd expect crisp, clean air, that fresh icy scent that modern people imagine when they think of winter scenes on postcards. Instead, the medieval countryside greets you with smoke. Thick, heavy wood smoke, hanging low in the air like a fog that refuses to leave. Every cottage belches out its own black plume from a hearth, rotted chimney, and the smoke clings to your clothes, your hair, and probably your soul. Step into this world, and you're already halfway smoked like a ham. And yet, the people here hardly notice it. They walk with slow, resigned movements, their faces red from windburn, their eyes narrowed against the sting of frost. Every exhale is visible, little ghosts leaving their lips, and the crunch of snow under their wooden clogs is rhythmic, almost musical. Children dart between the cottages, their laughter high and shrill, though their noses drip like faucets, and the hems of their tunics are stiff with frozen mud. Someone shouts at you to shut the door as you wander too close to a cottage entrance. Inside, the entire family is huddled together around a fire that looks pathetically small compared to the cold pressing in through the cracks. Smoke curls into the rafters because there's no proper chimney, only a hole in the roof that lets out half the heat. You think of your modern heating system. The thermostat you casually bump up a degree when your toes feel chilly. Here, if you wanted more warmth, you had to burn something, and good luck finding enough wood to last the winter. Forests are not your personal playground, they belong to the Lord, and taking a branch without permission could cost you a hand. Imagine calling your landlord today and asking if you could borrow some firewood, and he threatens to chop off your fingers. And yet, they manage. Somehow. Nights are spent lying together in the same bed, straw stuffed mattress poking at your back, lice crawling in the sheets, and a smell that reminds you faintly of damp socks left too long in a gym bag. Romance isn't dead here, but it's probably hiding under the bed, gagging. Still, the body heat of 3 or 4 family members pressed together is a survival tool, not an inconvenience. The peasants know this, and they laugh at your discomfort as you shift uncomfortably between them, trying to ignore the sharp straw stem working its way into your ankle. Hunger is the other enemy. The snow buries the fields, leaving nothing but memories of harvest. You hear the stomach growls before you see the thin gruel bubbling in a pot over the fire. Barley, oats, maybe a scrap of salted pork if the family is lucky. It smells faintly of desperation, and a lot like porridge someone left on the stove 3 days too long. You try a spoonful and nearly burn your tongue, but the warmth spreads down your throat in a way that feels life-saving. Then you remember this is breakfast, lunch, and dinner for the next 4 months. Someone sneezes violently beside you, a wet, hacking sound that sprays a mist you would very much prefer not to breathe in. The villagers call it a winter cough, but you know it by another name, pneumonia. No antibiotics here, no trip to the pharmacy for a quick fix. If your chest fills with fluid in January, odds are you won't be seeing April. People joke about flu season. In your world here, flu season is just winter, and the cure is either luck or burial. It's astonishing how they keep their humor. You watch an old man wrap rags around his feet before trudging out into the snow. His boots fell apart weeks ago, and shoes are not something you can just replace with a trip to the mall. He glances back at you, sees your face twisted with pity, and chuckles. "It's warmer when you don't feel your toes," he says, and keeps walking. You laugh nervously, because you're not sure if it's meant as a joke or a grim fact. Either way, you wiggle your toes inside your modern socks and feel guilty. When night falls, the darkness is absolute. No street lamps, no glow from a neighbor's window, just the faint flicker of firelight through shutters. The sound of wolves howling in the distance reminds you that the natural world isn't tamed yet. You lie there, staring at the beams above you, smelling the smoke and sweat and unwashed hair of the people pressed against you. And oddly enough, you begin to feel safe. Miserable, itchy, hungry, yes, but also oddly safe, because here survival is communal. If you shiver, others press closer. If you're hungry, the bowl of gruel is shared equally. You realize these peasants know something your modern world sometimes forgets. Survival isn't about comfort. It's about each other. Then the child beside you coughs again, a wet, rattling sound that makes your skin crawl. You think about germs, about bacteria, about how this entire room is basically one big infection incubator. The fire cracks, sparks fly, and someone snores loudly in your ear. You try not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. If only your friends could see you now. The glamorous time traveler sharing a bed with 3 lice-covered strangers, trying to stay warm by pretending you don't hear the rats scratching in the corner. And if you think sleeping beside strangers and rats is uncomfortable, wait until you discover how they actually kept food edible during these frozen months. Spoiler, it's not exactly appetizing. You wake in the morning to the sound of chickens, except they don't sound cheerful. They're half frozen and angry about it, clucking in a tone that can only be described as foul mood incarnate. The air inside the cottage is damp, heavy, and unkind. The fire reduced to embers that glow faintly like a dying star. Someone coughs hard enough to rattle the rafters, and you wonder if it's pneumonia, tuberculosis, or just the universal soundtrack of a medieval January. The mother of the household bustles about, though. Bustle might be too generous a word. She moves in layers of patched wool, skirts swishing, hair tucked under a grimy linen cap, hands raw and red from constant exposure to cold water. She stirs the pot of yesterday's gruel and pretends it's breakfast. You catch a whiff of oats boiled in water until they've given up all hope. If you thought oatmeal was bland in your world, imagine oatmeal stripped of sugar, butter, cinnamon, or anything remotely cheerful. It tastes like resignation, and yet they eat with gratitude. Children slurp noisily, adults chew with slow patience, and you realize quickly that turning up your nose at food here is an insult. Hunger waits outside the door like an enemy soldier. You take another spoonful and tell yourself it's not so bad. If you close your eyes, it's almost like no. Actually, it's exactly like wet cardboard. Once breakfast is over, chores begin. You are handed a wooden pail and pointed toward the village well. The snow crunches beneath your feet as you trudge along, trying not to slip. Every breath burns your lungs, the cold so sharp it feels like punishment. The well is surrounded by other villagers, each bundled in layers of rags, waiting their turn with buckets that look older than the concept of hygiene itself. The rope creaks as water is pulled up, and you notice the surface of the bucket has a thin film, like something growing there. No one cares. They dip, they pour, they drink. You're tempted to mutter something about water filters, but you catch yourself. Filters haven't been invented, and besides, parasites are practically considered extra protein. You carry the sloshing bucket back, spilling half along the way because medieval pails aren't designed with modern ergonomics. The handle digs into your palm, freezing your fingers numb. You imagine what people today would say if their tap water required a mile-long walk in the snow, 2 frostbitten fingers, and a high chance of giardia. Half of them wouldn't survive the first week. Back at the cottage, the father prepares to venture out, not to work the fields. They're useless under snow, but to check the food stores. You follow him to a shed that creaks ominously in the wind. Inside, the smell hits you first: salt, smoke, damp earth, and something undeniably rotten. Hanging from the beams are strips of meat, salted until they're stiff as wood, and in barrels along the wall sits preserved fish. At least, they were fish once. Now they're a kind of slimy experiment in how far desperation can bend the human stomach. The father picks one up, inspects it, shrugs. and tosses it back. In another corner, turnips and cabbages lie piled like tired soldiers, their outer leaves brown and curling. A rat darts from beneath them, bold as a landlord. And the man doesn't even flinch. He just mutters about the vermin stealing more than their share. You realize suddenly that rats aren't pests. Here, they're rivals competing directly for survival. It's you versus the whiskered army, and you don't always win. You step outside quickly to breathe air that isn't pickled in brine and rot. The cold slaps you in the face, but you prefer it. Children are playing nearby, if you can call it that. Their toy is a stick and a ball of rags, and the laughter sounds genuine despite everything. You smile, then realize their cheeks are cracked and bleeding from frost. Still, they run, shout, tumble into snowbanks with the kind of joy only children can conjure in the middle of hardship. You can't help but think of modern kids complaining when the Wi-Fi drops for 5 minutes. These children would probably trade their last turnip for an iPad, but somehow they seem perfectly content with a stick. By midday, the villagers gather for what could generously be called a meal. The pot is brought forward again, but this time with a surprise. A scrap of salted pork, hacked into uneven chunks, is tossed into the gruel. The smell alone lifts spirits. People lean in, eyes wide, mouths watering. The children clap. You think back to your own world where people order food delivery and complain if it arrives cold. Here, one salty, leathery scrap of pig fat is the highlight of an entire week. You chew carefully, not because you want to savor it, but because your teeth ache from the cold and the salt burns your gums. Still, you chew. And for a moment, you almost enjoy it. Later, as the sun begins to sink, smoke rises thicker from every chimney. The village prepares for night, because night here is not romantic moonlight. It's survival. Torches are lit. Doors are barred, shutters closed against the creeping dark. Wolves have been sighted in the forests. Their tracks in the snow a reminder that hunger isn't just a human condition. You hear them howl, a sound so raw it prickles your skin. Inside the cottage, the family huddles close again, fire stoked, a single pot boiling quietly. The day ends as it began, with warmth borrowed from each other, and food that tastes like determination. And as you lie there once more, the straw scratching at your neck, someone shifts beside you and you catch the sour scent of unwashed bodies. You think of hot showers, deodorant, toothpaste, all luxuries centuries away. You bite back a laugh because complaining seems absurd now. If you think this level of filth and stench is unbearable, wait until you discover how peasants actually cleaned themselves, or didn't. Morning doesn't so much arrive as creep in slowly, like a thief unsure if it's welcome. There's no glowing sunrise over snowy fields, no romantic vision of light scattering diamonds across frosted meadows. What you get instead is a weak grey smear through the cracks in the shutters, and the sound of someone hacking up something wet in the corner. You sit up, rub the crust of smoke from your eyes, and immediately wish you hadn't moved. The cold is merciless. It slaps your face, sneaks down the back of your neck, and gnaws at your toes. You shuffle closer to the hearth. The fire is nearly gone, just a few stubborn coals glowing faintly, like tiny red eyes daring you to hope. The father of the household is already crouched over it, coaxing the embers with a steady breath. He places a thin log onto the glowing heart, and for a moment nothing happens. Then, a thin flame licks upward, fragile as a candle's first breath, before catching properly. Smoke fills the room, the kind that scratches your throat and makes your eyes water. Everyone coughs, but no one complains. You suspect they've grown so used to it, that their lungs are half charcoal by now. Breakfast is the same gruel, thicker this time, because yesterday's leftovers have been scraped together into something that might pass as stew. You dip a spoon into it, and find what looks suspiciously like a turnip peel floating there. The children fight over who gets the good bits, which is to say the pieces that don't taste like water. You sip politely, because you've realized this food isn't about taste. It's about survival, about tricking your belly into believing it has something worth digesting. After breakfast, it's your turn to help fetch more wood. You groan inwardly, because you've noticed that wood isn't exactly abundant. The Lord owns most of the forest, and peasants are left to scavenge the outskirts. Fallen branches, shrubs, anything that burns. You trudge with the father and 2 other villagers through knee, deep snow toward a nearby thicket. Your breath steams in the air. Your fingers ache even through your mitts, and your toes feel like they've been individually dipped in ice water. The peasants seem unconcerned. They chatter idly, occasionally swearing at the weather, but they move with steady determination. At the edge of the thicket, you all bend to gather sticks. It's humiliating work. Really, you're not chopping down mighty trees, you're scrabbling for scraps like a desperate raccoon. The branches snap in your cold hands, stiff and brittle, and every step sinks your boots deeper into icy sludge. You wonder why people don't just stay inside and give up. Then you look at their faces. Thin, tired, but alive. Giving up isn't a luxury they can afford. If you don't gather wood, you don't burn a fire. If you don't burn a fire, you don't wake up tomorrow. You haul the bundle back, arms burning, fingers numb. By the time you reach the cottage, you smell faintly of damp wood and despair. The family greets the return of firewood with genuine joy, like you've just brought home a golden treasure. It's sobering. In your world, firewood is an aesthetic choice, a rustic touch for a cozy fireplace. Here it is life. You drop the bundle by the hearth, and the children cheer. Midday comes with no fanfare, just more grey sky and endless cold. The villagers gather in the square, though calling it a square is generous. It's a patch of churned snow, muddy from too many boots and too few shovels. A few market stalls stand there, wooden frames draped with cloth stiff from frost. People barter more than they buy. A sack of onions for a handful of dried beans, a jar of honey for a wedge of cheese. You watch a woman pull a dead hare from her apron and haggle fiercely over its price, as if it's the crown jewels. The deal ends in a handshake and a muttered prayer that it lasts more than a single meal. A man notices your curious expression and grins with a mouth that has perhaps 3 teeth left. "Better than starving," he says, shrugging. His breath smells like a cross between ile and bad decisions. You nod politely, trying not to breathe too deeply. Hygiene here is less about bathing and more about hoping the stench freezes before it kills you. You're ushered toward the Alla house, the village's beating heart. Inside, the air is thick with smoke, laughter, and the sour tang of cheap ale. Men sit hunched over mugs, women gossip in corners, and a bard strums a lute that sounds suspiciously out of tune. The warmth is immediate, enveloping you like a long, lost blanket, and for a moment you forget how miserable the outside world is. The peasants drink deeply, though not to excess. Ale is safer than water. You sip too, and the liquid is warm, yeasty, and slightly sour. Not pleasant, but at least you won't die of dysentery. The conversation around you is lively. Complaints about the Lord, jokes about the cold, muttered rumors about wolves dragging off livestock. One man tells a story about a neighbor's cow freezing to death mid-step, still standing in the field. The table erupts in laughter, and you laugh too, partly out of politeness and partly because the absurdity is too perfect. You wonder how many winters have passed like this, how many generations have sat in this same smoky hall, drinking the same foul ale, telling the same bleak jokes. By evening, you stagger back to the cottage, not from drink but from exhaustion. The cold gnaws at you, your bones ache, your lips are cracked, and your stomach still rumbles despite the food. You collapse onto the straw bed again, pressed between bodies, lice tickling at your scalp. You close your eyes and try to imagine the comfort of your own bed, your own sheets, your own heating. But then you hear the quiet sound of a lullaby being sung to the children, soft and tender despite the hardships. It cuts through the filth, the stench, the misery. For a brief moment, the cottage feels like a home. You drift into sleep with the sound of the wolves, still echoing outside. And if you think wolves were the only things peasants feared at night, wait until you hear what came crawling into their homes when the fire went out. Night again. It feels as though the sun never really committed itself to rising, only teased the village with a grey blink before retreating once more. Inside the cottage, the fire burns low, and the air grows heavy with the smell of smoke, sweat, and damp wool. You shift slightly on the straw bed and instantly regret it. The straw pokes at your skin, itching like 1,000 little insect legs which, to be fair, might not be entirely inaccurate. Something small crawls near your ankle, and you decide not to investigate. Sometimes ignorance is the only shield. The family has a routine for winter nights. Everyone huddles in tight, bodies pressed together like livestock in a pen. Heat is shared, not politely but desperately, as if warmth itself is a scarce resource. Children wriggle between their parents, and you are squashed into the corner, half grateful for the weight of another body leaning against yours. The smell of unwashed hair is pungent, but so is survival. As the fire dims, shadows grow. They stretch across the walls, swallowing corners and creeping into every crack. The father mutters a prayer under his breath, one that asks for protection from more than just wolves. You listen carefully, and the words reveal a fear far older than hunger, spirits, demons, and restless souls that wander in the long, dark nights. For a moment, you almost laugh. Then a gust of wind whistles through the cracks in the wood, high and sharp like a wail, and you decide not to laugh after all. Rats make their presence known. You hear them first, a faint scratching, claws against the timber. Then you spot one darting across the floor, its slick body glistening in the firelight. The mother throws a shoe, and the rat scurries into the shadows. No one screams, no one gasps. This is not unusual. Rats are simply part of the furniture here, like stools, spoons, or lice. You try not to imagine what diseases they carry, or worse, how easily they slip over sleeping bodies in search of crumbs. The coughing starts again. A child wheezes in the dark, his chest rattling with phlegm. The mother strokes his hair, murmuring a lullaby that does little to soften the hacking sound. You realize quickly how fragile life is here. A simple cough, left unchecked, could mean death. No antibiotics. No doctors beyond the occasional herbal woman with roots and poultices. Illness isn't a question of if, but when. You doze in and out of shallow sleep, ears alert for every sound. The shifting bodies, the creak of wood, the hiss of embers, the eerie howls outside. At some point, you wake to find the room utterly dark, the fire nearly gone. The cold is brutal, biting, merciless. You curl deeper into the straw, burrowing like an animal, praying for warmth. Somewhere nearby, you hear the father stir and rise. He feeds another log into the hearth, coaxing life into the dying flame. You realize this is the rhythm of their nights, a constant battle between fire and frost, repeated until spring offers relief. Morning comes, though again, morning is generous. It is simply less dark than before. The cycle repeats. Gruel, chores, the endless search for wood, the constant gnaw of hunger. The days blur, each indistinguishable from the next, stitched together by the cold and the sheer will to endure it. And yet, there are moments of joy. Small ones, almost microscopic. A child laughs when snow drifts from the roof and lands squarely on the father's head. A neighbor shares a hunk of bread, stale but edible, as if it were the richest of gifts. Someone strums a lute in the alehouse and, though out of tune, it lifts spirits higher than any sermon. These tiny sparks keep despair at bay, proof that even in the cruelest winter, humanity finds ways to laugh. One evening, you sit in the alehouse again, the smoky air wrapping around you like a heavy cloak. A man leans over, breath thick with oil, and tells you about last winter. Colder than this one, he swears. Will lost half the sheep. Froze where they stood. My cousin's boy. He pauses, shakes his head. Didn't wake up one morning. Fire went out. Just like that. He snaps his fingers. That's how it happens. One night you're alive, the next you're ice. He shrugs, sips again, and changes the subject to pigs. Life and death are woven together here so tightly that grief has no choice but to sit quietly beside laughter. By now, you've grown strangely accustomed to the rhythm. The hunger doesn't shock you as much. The cold is still unbearable, but expected. And even the lice feel less like invaders, and more like uninvited house guests you can't get rid of. The longer you stay, the more you realize that survival isn't about comfort. It's about lowering the bar so far that simply waking up is a victory. On your last night of this first winter's taste, you lie awake and stare at the rafters above. You think of your own world. Thermostats, hot showers, refrigerators, and it feels obscene, like you've been cheating all along. Here, survival is a skill, a negotiation with nature every single day, and you begin to understand peasants didn't live through winters in the way you live now. They endured. They clung. They scraped through. And when spring finally thawed the earth, it wasn't just a change of season. It was a miracle. Still, you can't shake the nagging feeling that winter wasn't only about cold and hunger. Something else lurked here, waiting for the fire to die down. If you thought rats in the rafters were disturbing, wait until you discover what other uninvited guests shared the cottage when the night stretched long and food grew short. You wake to scratching. Not the soft shuffle of straw, not the creak of timbers straining under frost, but a deliberate sound, sharp, persistent. Something small, hungry, and annoyingly confident. At first you pretend it's just the dream residue in your ears. Then you feel a faint tickle on your ankle. You kick instinctively and hear a squeak vanish into the dark. Congratulations, you have officially met the unofficial landlords of the peasant cottage. Rats. They are everywhere, and you quickly realize no amount of shoe throwing will fix this infestation. They slither through cracks in the walls, scamper across beams above your head, and occasionally drop onto sleeping bodies like furry grenades. The family doesn't even flinch anymore. A child bats one away mid-sleep without opening his eyes, like swatting a fly. You wonder what's worse, that they're here, or that everyone treats it as normal. Rats bring friends. Fleas. You don't see them at first, you feel them. Tiny pinpricks on your wrists, your neck, the soft flesh where your shirt gapes open. You scratch and scratch until the skin feels raw. The children are scratching too, nails filthy, leaving thin red lines across their arms. No one mentions it aloud, because what's the point? It isn't a problem to solve, it's simply the texture of winter. By midday, you've developed a suspicion that fleas may actually own this place. The peasants just pay rent in blood. You sit by the fire, pretending you're not clawing your own skin to ribbons, and you wonder if this is what insanity feels like. Then you notice the mother dipping her fingers into a small clay pot of animal fat. She rubs it into the children's hair, working it down to the scalp. You realize with horror and reluctant admiration that this is their defense. The grease suffocates lice. You suddenly understand why everyone smells like an old butcher's apron. They're not lazy, they're strategists in a microscopic war. If fleas were the only tormentors, perhaps winter would be bearable. But the air itself is sick. The cottage is thick with smoke that curls from the hearth and refuses to leave, stinging your eyes, clawing your throat. The father coughs, chest rattling like a broken bellows. The grandmother hacks up something unspeakable into a rag. Children wheeze in their sleep. And yet, this is the safe option. Without smoke, the fire dies. Without fire, so do you. You find yourself wondering how many winters it takes before lungs simply collapse. Water is no refuge either. The river outside is frozen solid, its surface a glassy tomb. Melted snow is the alternative, gathered in buckets and boiled into something vaguely drinkable. Except you notice no one bothers boiling all the time. Sometimes they drink it straight, shrugging as if illness is inevitable anyway. The idea of clean water, endlessly piped into every home, would probably sound to them like sorcery. You're careful with your own cup, but not careful enough to stop your stomach from twisting later. You suspect you've just signed up for medieval food poisoning, an experience no travel guide recommended. The filth accumulates, not metaphorically, but literally. There's no sewer, no drainage, no polite plumbing system. Waste is tossed into a pit or sometimes just dumped outside, where it freezes into grotesque little monuments. You step carefully when walking to the woodshed, because a misstep means skating across frozen. Well, you get the idea. The stench never leaves, not even in sub-zero temperatures. It clings to your nose, follows you like an unshakable ghost. You wonder if anyone here notices anymore, or if centuries of exposure have simply rewired their sense of smell. Inside, privacy doesn't exist. If someone is sick, everyone witnesses it. If someone relieves themselves in the chamber pot, the entire cottage politely ignores the splash. You glance at the pot in the corner, half full, and suppress a gag. Tomorrow it will be emptied into the midden, joining the village's collective offering to the gods of disease. For now it just sits there, steaming faintly in the cold air. At night, when you think things can't get worse, they do. The rats grow bolder in the dark. You hear them gnawing wood, their teeth clicking like tiny saws. One scurries across your chest as you drift in and out of sleep, and you bolt upright, swatting in terror. The family laughs gently, as if you've overreacted to a house cat. You feel a little ridiculous, but also certain that one of these rodents is plotting to eat your face. You begin to see why winter stories are full of demons and witches. In this place, where scratching sounds never cease, where shadows seem to twitch on their own, where illness waits in every cough, it doesn't take much imagination to believe something supernatural is lurking. The line between plague and possession, fever and haunting, is razor thin. You can't decide if that's more frightening or comforting. And just when you think you've catalogued every horror of indoor life, you learn about the bread. Not the warm, fluffy loaves of your imagination. This is hard, grey bread, baked from coarse rye and stretched with whatever filler the family can find. Sawdust, ground acorns, sometimes even powdered beans. You try to bite into it and nearly chip a tooth. The father tells you it lasts longer this way. You nod while your gums bleed slightly. Starvation doesn't leave room for pickiness. Yet amid all this, laughter exists. You watch a child chase a rat with a stick, jiggling as if it's a game. You hear the grandmother tell a joke about fleas preferring nobles because they taste better, and everyone chuckles at the absurdity. Humor, it seems, is another kind of fire. Small, flickering, but enough to keep despair from swallowing the room whole. You scratch your arm again, trying not to bleed. And then, from the corner of the room, you hear something new, the faint rattle of bones. At first you think it's the wind. Then you notice the grandmother clutching her chest, gasping, eyes glazed. The family rushes to her side, but they do not panic. They've seen this before. You realize with a jolt that winter doesn't only strip away comfort. It strips away people. And if you thought rats and fleas were cruel companions, wait until you sit with death itself, when it decides to linger in the cottage all season long. The grandmother's breath comes in rattles, each one thinner than the last. The family gathers close, not with frantic urgency, but with a practiced sorrow. They know what's coming. You can see it in the way the father strokes a hand, in the way the mother hums a low tune through trembling lips. Even the children, restless as they usually are, sit quiet as mice. Death here is no stranger. It's the guest who always arrives uninvited, but never unexpected. You sit awkwardly in the corner, not sure whether to look or turn away. Where you come from, death is hidden behind hospital curtains, sanitized with antiseptic, sealed in metal drawers. Here, it is intimate, witnessed, and smelled. The grandmother lets out one last sigh, shallow and faint, and then her chest stills. Silence thickens, broken only by the fire's crackle. No one screams, no one collapses. They simply bow their heads. The father rises first. He crosses himself, then whispers something you can't quite catch. His face is carved in stone, hard and unreadable, but his hands tremble when he pulls a worn blanket over her still body. The mother begins to cry softly, her tears slipping silently down her cheeks. A child asks if grandmother is cold. No one answers. The body cannot stay here long. The air is already heavy with the odors of life and smoke. Death will only add another layer. Yet outside the ground is frozen solid, harder than stone. Graves in winter are a nightmare, carved not with reverence but with brute strength. Sometimes the earth is too cruel, and bodies are left in simple shrouds inside sheds until spring thaws the soil. You glance at the father and wonder which choice he will make. The next morning, you follow him to the churchyard. The priest meets you there, his breath puffing in the air, his robes patched with old repairs. The burial is brisk, almost perfunctory. The prayers are muttered quickly, as if words themselves could freeze on the tongue. The grave is shallow, dug with pickaxes that spark against ice. A few villagers help, their movements weary, their eyes hollow. They've seen this too many times already this season. The body is lowered, wrapped in a simple sheet. No coffin, no ornate stone, no grand marker. Just a mound of earth, quickly covered, quickly blessed. You find yourself shivering not just from cold, but from the sheer simplicity of it all. A whole life, decades of work, laughter, hunger, survival, reduced to a shallow patch of dirt. Yet the family doesn't despair openly. They walk home with bowed heads, shoulders heavy, but their steps remain steady. Survival allows no long mourning. Inside the cottage, life continues. Bread is baked, wood is gathered, gruel is eaten. The grandmother's absence is a hollow space, but the chores don't wait. You realize that in this world, grief must be carried alongside labor. There is no pause button, no retreat into quiet rooms of comfort. You mourn while your hands work, or else you starve. At night, stories are told around the hearth. Not about the grandmother, not directly. Instead, Tales of spirits wandering in the cold are whispered, half warning, half entertainment. The children listen wide-eyed as the father describes ghosts who knock on windows, demons that slip through cracks in the roof, witches who creep into cottages to steal warmth. You feel a chill, though not from the wind. These aren't just fables for them. In the long nights of winter, when death walks casually through the village, the boundary between folklore and reality feels very thin. Your sleep is restless. Every groan of the rafters sounds like a whisper. Every draft feels like a hand on your shoulder. You pull the blanket tighter and try to laugh at yourself, but the unease lingers. Perhaps you've begun to absorb their fears. Perhaps it's impossible not to, when you've watched death slip so easily into the room. Yet amid all this darkness, resilience shines through. The very next morning, you see the mother smile faintly as she combs lice from her daughter's hair. The father jokes about the priest's nose turning blue in the cold. The children laugh again, chasing each other through the snow outside. Life insists on itself, stubborn as weeds pushing through stone. You realize then that survival is not just about enduring cold and hunger. It is about learning to live alongside death, without collapsing under its weight. These peasants have mastered that grim balancing act. They carry sorrow and laughter in the same breath, because winter demands both. You scratch another flea bite on your arm and stare into the smoky fire, eyes watering, skin raw. You think you've seen the worst of winter now. But then a villager mutters something about the hunger that still lies ahead. The kind that turns neighbors against one another, the kind that makes even bark and leather taste like feasts. And if you thought rats and shallow graves were the peak of despair, wait until you sit at a table where there is nothing left to eat but desperation itself. You wake again to the grey drizzle of winter light, and your stomach groans in protest. Not a polite, "I'm a little hungry" sort of groan, but the kind that twists and churns like a coiled rope. Hunger is a constant companion now, rubbing its gnawed elbows against your ribs, whispering, reminding you that nothing in this frozen world comes free. You glance around the cottage. The pot by the fire is thinner than yesterday, almost empty, and the scraps of bread left are harder than the floor beneath your feet. The father gestures toward the pantry, and your heart sinks. Barrels of turnips, some sprouting green like tiny stubborn weeds, a few salted roots that have seen better seasons, and the dreaded sawdust bread. Yes, sawdust bread. The food that tastes like despair, that crunches like broken bones under the teeth. You bite tentatively, cheeks flushing as the dry gruel sticks to your throat. Somehow you swallow. You must. Hunger does not negotiate. Outside, the village is eerily silent. The snow is thick, blanketing the fields and burying any chance of foraging. The livestock huddle in their pens, skinny, shivering, eyes wide. Some have already been sacrificed to keep the family alive. The father trudges out to check the last of the pigs. Their ribs show through taut skin, their breath fogs in the air. You try not to imagine what dinner will be tonight, because you're fairly certain it won't be a celebratory meal. By mid-morning, the children are restless, their small bodies quivering with cold and hunger. They gnaw on raw turnips, their lips blue, their stomachs growling. The mother scolds them lightly, but even she knows it won't help. The food is rationed. Every bite is measured. You realize that these children have already learned the rules of survival in a way you could never imagine. No complaints, no tantrums, only patient chewing, storing energy like little batteries for the day. You try to step outside, hoping the cold will distract you from the ache in your belly. The wind is a knife. Snow swirls, stinging your cheeks, and each step threatens to send you sliding into frozen mud. You notice footprints in the snow, a trail of desperation from the previous week's foraging. Villagers have scavenged wherever they could, taking bark, roots, even frozen weeds. You gag slightly at the thought, but then the father bends to pick up a scrap of birch bark from the snow, and you understand. It's food. Or, at least, it's survival. Back inside, you see something else that a neighbor has arrived, carrying a small sack. Everyone gathers close, curiosity mixing with dread. The neighbor pulls out the contents. Mushrooms, half rotted but edible. A few scraps of dried fish. The room smells faintly of decay, but hunger sharpens appreciation. You taste a sliver of the mushroom, and it's bitter, gritty, almost poisonous in texture, but it fills your stomach. You start to understand that in this world, taste is a luxury, survival is the priority. The alehouse is a different kind of theatre. Where once people might have gathered to drink and laugh, now they whisper, watch each other, barter is tense. One man offers a few crumbs of bread for a single turnip. Negotiations are sharp, wary. Everyone knows that scarcity makes desperate people unpredictable. You glance around, imagining modern people squabbling over a cup of Starbucks coffee. It feels absurd. Here it's life and death. By afternoon, the true horror of winter hunger begins. You watch as a woman peels the outer bark from a tree trunk and roasts it over a meager fire. The smell is acrid, woody, almost enough to make you gag. She breaks off a thin strip and chews it carefully, grinding it between teeth, saliva soaking into the fibrous pulp. The children watch hungrily, and the mother gestures for you to try. You hesitate, chew, and realize that starvation sharpens appetite in ways you didn't know existed. You swallow and grimace, swallowing the taste of the forest itself. The snow outside is relentless. The fields are buried, the forest scarce. You begin to understand why peasants would sometimes resort to extreme measures. Every scrap of bark, every root, every piece of old grain is precious. Any misstep could mean a night with nothing in your stomach. You watch the villagers silently, noting the subtle rituals. Sharing the smallest pieces first with the children, leaving the scraps for the sick, saving the worst for themselves. Sacrifice is not heroic here, it's routine. Night falls, merciless and early. You sit by the fire, stomach aching, listening to the wind howl through gaps in the wood. The rats scurry about as usual, adding their own soundtrack to your misery. The fire flickers and dies, leaving shadows dancing like demons across the walls. You think you've endured everything, cold, lice, fleas, hunger, but winter always has one more lesson. Someone whispers about the famine that came decades ago, when entire villages nearly vanished. You listen, fascinated and horrified. Children died quietly in their sleep. Parents starved while feeding their offspring. Bread was stretched with ashes. Fish was scavenged from frozen rivers, half dead. And when nothing else remained, sometimes worse rumors spread, whispered at night, about neighbors who cross the line into things no one speaks of aloud. You sit a little straighter, realizing survival has limits, and sometimes the mind bends first. And yet, even in these moments, you see humanity clinging stubbornly to life. A neighbor shares a scrap of bread without question. Children laugh, chasing each other through snow despite emptiness in their bellies. The mother hums a tune while mashing turnips for dinner. You realize then that hunger doesn't only take life. It teaches resilience, creativity, and courage that no luxury could ever instill. Tomorrow, they will forage again, scrape bark, boil roots, scavenge for anything that might pass for sustenance. And as you lie on the straw bed, stomach still twisting, you realize that famine is not a story of despair alone. It is a story of endurance, of small victories carved from impossible conditions, of laughter that survives even when the body is hungry. But if you think the worst of winter is hunger and frostbite, wait until you discover the hidden dangers of disease, and how peasants faced invisible killers that didn't announce themselves with cold wind or gnawing belly. You wake with a tickle in your throat, faint at first, almost ignorable. By mid-morning, it blossoms into a rasping cough that rattles deep in your chest. You glance around the cottage and notice that everyone else has a similar affliction. The children sniffle, cheeks flushed. The mother's eyes are watery. The father coughs once, twice, a wet sound that makes you wince. Welcome to winter in a medieval village, where sickness is not a visitor, but a constant roommate. The cottage smells of smoke, sweat, and something tangibly wrong, stale gruel and unwashed bodies, of course, but underneath it all, the unmistakable odor of infection. You remember clean air, antiseptic, even modern cold medicine, and marvel at how naive your former self was. Here, the idea of a sore throat comes with no warning labels, no instructions, no Tylenol. Just coughing, fever, and hope you don't get worse. The mother rises first, holding a tin cup filled with water and what looks like crushed herbs. You watch as she hands it to the father. Drink, she says softly. It'll make you better. You swallow and taste bitterness so sharp it could strip paint. She smiles faintly, though she clearly knows it's more ritual than cure. The herbs, poultices, and prayers form the medieval medicine of the peasantry. a delicate mix of superstition and observation, often as likely to harm as heal. You step outside to breathe and immediately wish you hadn't. The wind bites with teeth of ice, carrying faint smells of sickness from nearby cottages. Across the square, smoke rises from chimneys, but it's not just from fires. It's the smell of fever, of disease, of people burning what meager things they can to chase away invisible demons. You notice a neighbor clutching a cloth to his face, eyes red from coughing. You realize this is the normal state of winter. Everyone is ill in some form, and nobody talks about it except in murmurs overall. By midday, the realities of medieval medicine become unavoidable. You follow the mother to a neighboring house where a child is burning with fever. She places a hot cloth on his chest, murmuring prayers and instructions. There are no doctors, only women who have watched bodies and listened to groans for decades. They know which poultices soothe, which potions merely poison, and which rituals scare away more than spirits. Sometimes fear is the best medicine. You sip your own gruel, watching, realizing that survival depends as much on superstition as it does on food and fire. Outside, the village is eerily quiet. Snow blankets everything, muffling sounds, softening movement. But you hear coughing, hacking, wheezing, all amplified in the still air. Some villagers walk the streets wrapped in layers, others stagger back from the well with frozen hands, each step a small victory. You imagine modern hospitals, sterile and warm, and shiver at the contrast. Here, exposure to cold, filth, and germs is unavoidable. By afternoon, the first signs of plague begin to appear in your imagination, and perhaps they are already there. You see pustules on a neighbor's arm, small, angry red dots forming clusters. The woman smiles weakly and hides it with her sleeve. Nobody panics openly. Panic is expensive, and you can't afford it when you might still need their help tomorrow. You sense that fear is silent, shared in glance and gesture rather than words. Inside your own cottage, preventive measures are crude. Herbs hung from the beams, smoke wafting in slow curls, and prayers whispered between coughs. The family moves carefully, tending to one another, rubbing mustard seeds or garlic on their skin, hoping for a shield stronger than their meager coats. You notice the father scratching a lesion on his arm and flinch, realizing that winter doesn't only attack the body with cold, it preys on the living like a cunning predator, striking where you least expect. And then there are the remedies you didn't expect. A neighbor offers a concoction of chicken fat, honey, and some root that looks suspiciously like it was dug up from the frozen garden last week. Drink, he says. It keeps the fever from turning to death. You sip, grimace, and swallow, instantly regretting it, but you survive. Somehow, everyone survives, or at least clings close enough to life that tomorrow is possible. Night falls, and the fire is tiny, flickering shadows across the walls. The coughs grow louder in the darkness, echoing from corner to corner. You realize that disease is as persistent as cold or hunger, following you even when you close your eyes. Yet life continues. The children laugh between coughs, stories are whispered to distract from aches, and someone even manages a crude joke about the rats preferring the sick. You can't help but smile through the unease, recognizing that humor is the most effective medicine of all. As sleep creeps in, you wonder what tomorrow will bring: more coughing, more herbal rituals, perhaps even visits from strangers carrying news of deaths in neighboring villages. Winter is not simply a season here. It is a gauntlet, a trial, and survival is a negotiation with every element, every pest, every whispered fear. And just when you think you understand the boundaries of illness, wait until you see the miraculous and horrifying ways peasants tried to cure themselves, and how even small mistakes could tip the balance between life and death. Morning comes not with light, but with the low groan of bodies in discomfort. The mother is already moving through the cottage, carrying steaming pots of herbal concoctions. You watch her mix, stir, and taste, knowing full well that each sip, each dab of poultice, could save a life or hasten its end. Medicine here is more improvisation than science. One root might soothe a fever, another could poison. The line between cure and curse is invisible. A neighbor arrives carrying a small child with a high fever. The child's skin is flushed, lips dry and cracked. You observe the mother gently wrap a hot cloth around the child's chest, then smear a thick layer of honey and crushed herbs over the blistering skin. It draws the sickness out, she murmurs. You raise an eyebrow, but no one questions it. You remind yourself that desperate times produce desperate measures. In your modern world, a doctor would order tests. Here, intuition, folklore, and hope serve as the diagnostic tools. You follow the father outside, past frozen puddles and snow-laden paths, toward a neighbor who is known for his cures. He keeps a small collection of dried herbs, roots, and animal parts hanging from beams, each labeled with ink that has faded to near illegibility. You notice a bottle of thick black liquid that smells faintly of iron and despair. For plague spots, he says cheerfully. Drink a thimbleful. Spit out the rest if you must. You wonder why you agreed to follow him. Inside his cottage you see the instruments. A crude knife with a wooden handle, a pair of tongs, a bowl of boiling water. Surgeries are rare, but sometimes necessary. Abscesses are lanced, boils drained, and occasionally, if a fever persists, someone is blood. You wince as the man explains. It balances the humors. You nod politely, trying not to imagine your modern immune system being sliced open without anesthesia. Children cling to their mothers, eyes wide as adults demonstrate bandaging, poultices and cauterizing. The youngest, curious and fearless, pokes at a piece of dried meat used for medicinal purposes. A quick slap, a soft scolding, and life continues. Humor is the only shield against horror. You realize that surviving disease in winter isn't just about physical resilience. It's a mental endurance test. By afternoon, news drifts through the village. Another neighbor has died. No mourning bells, no grand announcements. Just hushed whispers, glances, and a faint sense of inevitability. You see villagers adjust, moving around the absence as if rehearsed for decades. Death is present, unavoidable, and the most patient teacher of all. The family gathers near the fire, examining symptoms and debating remedies. Some swear by garlic, others by a paste of crushed worms, believed to draw sickness from the body. You try not to gag, realizing that survival requires imagination, and a willingness to taste things you never thought edible. You sip weak ale instead, hoping it offers some protection against fever and despair. Night falls heavy and silent, broken only by the coughs of those still clinging to life. You lie on straw, listening to the fire crackle, and wonder how many nights have passed like this for generations before. The village is a carousel of suffering, ritual, and occasional laughter. You think about modern hospitals, pills, and vaccines, and for a moment, it feels almost absurd that anyone ever survived without them. Yet here, resilience is more than adaptation. It is an art, honed through necessity. A shadow moves near the doorway. It is a rat, bold and unafraid. You notice a faint gleam on its fur, like the reflection of disease itself. You chuckle nervously, realizing that even pests seem to understand the stakes. One nibble, one mistake, and survival tips toward death. You wonder if the villagers notice, or if they simply see it as another roommate in their crowded, fevered world. The mother administers one final remedy for the night. A paste of crushed herbs, honey, and a hint of something foul, smelling you hope is not poison. She rubs it into the father's chest and whispers a prayer. The warmth spreads through his skin, faint but comforting. You realize that ritual is as much medicine as substance here. The prayer, the touch, the hope. These are potent tools in a world where life is fragile. You drift toward sleep, ears straining for every cough, every creak, every whisper of the night. Fever, frost, hunger, and death swirl together in the darkness. Yet, even amid this grim theater, you sense the indomitable spirit of the villagers. Laughter erupts unexpectedly, small sparks in the oppressive gloom. A child giggles as a rat scuttles across the floor, and the father chuckles softly despite a hacking cough. Survival in this winter village is not about comfort, taste, or pleasure. It is about endurance, improvisation, and a stubborn refusal to yield. Disease, cold, and hunger form a triad of terror, yet humanity persists. You realize that the lessons here are timeless. Hope, laughter, and ingenuity can exist even in the filthiest, coldest, most dangerous nights. And as you finally close your eyes, wrapped in straw and the faint warmth of embers, a thought creeps in. If you think diseases and herbal horror were the ultimate trial, wait until you meet the strange and sometimes terrifying remedies for childbirth and pregnancy in this frozen world, where magic, superstition, and survival collide in ways that would make a modern hospital blush. You wake to a different kind of tension in the cottage this morning. The air is thicker, charged with anticipation and fear. The mother's face is pale, hands trembling, as she adjusts the blankets for a woman in labor in the corner. The groans, hisses, and sharp intakes of breath fill the room like an orchestra tuned to dread. This is no gentle awakening. This is life arriving in the most violent, miraculous way possible. You watch closely, heart pounding. The father stands nearby, clutching a piece of cloth, looking utterly useless and entirely necessary at the same time. Children are hushed, eyes wide, sniffing the fear like a warning signal. You suddenly realize that childbirth in winter is not a private affair. It is communal, urgent, messy, and terrifying. The woman in labor screams, a sound so raw and human that it makes you wince. The mother kneels beside her, murmuring prayers, rubbing her hands with something greasy and herbal. You realize quickly that modern hospitals have spoiled you. Here there are no anesthetics, no sterile gloves, no epidurals. Just hands, hope, and centuries of experience guiding them through agony. The midwife? Well, everyone here is a midwife, but some more official than others, examines the woman, murmuring about positions, timing, and the subtle whispers of spirits that might aid or hinder the birth. You notice a small charm hanging from her neck, dried herbs, a carved bone, and a tiny coin. She swears it helps, and you almost laugh. But then the woman screams again, and you think maybe charm or no charm. She's going to tear the walls down with her voice. Outside, winter howls, indifferent to the miracle, or horror, unfolding indoors. The fire spits sparks, smoke curling in lazy spirals, and the scent of straw, sweat, and bitter herbs combines into something you can't quite name. Your stomach twists as you remember breakfast, a thin gruel, barely filling, now mingling unpleasantly with the iron tang of fear in the air. The father fetches a basin of warm water. Not enough for comfort, just enough to prevent frostbite on their hands, and some semblance of sanitation. You notice that even in this chaos, routines matter. A dropped rag, a misplaced pot, an unwashed hand could be disastrous. You glance at your own fingers, and realize they're probably dirtier than the midwife's. No judgment, though. Survival has always demanded pragmatism over hygiene. The labor continues, hours stretching like frozen rivers. You try to distract yourself with observation, how the mother soothes, how the father fumbles yet persists. How children peek from corners, fascinated and terrified. It's a dance of life and death performed without music, without warning, only instinct and learned skill. And then, you see it a moment of grim humor. The midwife mutters about the absurdity of men being helpless, when they usually just flail and faint, and the father nods sheepishly. You suppress a laugh at the image of modern men being forced into the same scene, sweating and useless while everyone else works miracles around them. Survival demands awkward participation, it seems. The smell shifts suddenly. Sweat, fear, and something unmistakably metallic. Blood, inevitable and unstoppable, fills the room. You grip a chair, toes curling into the straw. Yet amid the horror, the mother hums a tune, low and steady, coaxing the rhythm of birth like she's conducting an orchestra of chaos. The woman screams, then pushes, then cries out in relief, and finally, there is a sound you cannot forget, a newborn's first wail, piercing and triumphant. Silence follows, a breath held collectively by the entire cottage. The baby is wrapped in blankets, small and warm, a miracle carved from pain. The mother hands the infant to its mother, who rocks and murmurs, tears mingling with sweat on her cheeks. You notice that even in winter, even in the shadow of hunger and disease, life insists on appearing, stubborn as frost clinging to rooftops. Later, as you sit by the fire, the mother whispers to you about winter pregnancies. Most fail, she says quietly. Babies born in snow and hunger are fragile, often leaving the world before they've learned to cry. Women carry more than just children. They carry risk, fatigue, and fear of what winter will take next. You sip your gruel, suddenly grateful for modern medicine, yet secretly awed by their endurance. And just when you think the dangers of winter birth are over, the mother pulls out something you wouldn't believe, a crude tool for cutting the umbilical cord, sharpened and sterilized only in the fire. She doesn't flinch. You flinch for her, and yet somehow hundreds of generations of women have wielded it, welcomed life, and survived. You realize that childbirth in this time is not only painful, it's a war fought with hands, fire, herbs, and stubbornness. By nightfall, The cottage smells faintly of herbs, blood, and newborn sweat. The father attempts to boil water for tea, his hands shaking, while children sleep exhausted in corners. You lie on straw, mind racing, stomach growling despite the miracle you witnessed. You wonder how many infants never made it this far, how many mothers never drew breath again, and how each winter carries the silent weight of countless untold stories. And as you drift toward a fitful sleep, you realize one thing: if you thought hunger, frost, and disease were harrowing, wait until you witness the unspoken, almost ritualistic dangers of period, miscarriage, and the supernatural fears surrounding women's bodies in winter cottages. A world where superstition and survival are inseparable. The fire sputters in the corner, casting trembling shadows over the cottage as night settles like a thick, suffocating blanket. You hear soft sobs from the mother of the newborn, not for her child, but for those she has lost, silent tragedies that winter has claimed over decades. She whispers names quietly, almost as if speaking them aloud could summon the spirits of infants who never took a breath. You realize that the joy of new life always comes hand in hand with the memory of death. A neighbor arrives, clutching her swollen belly, face pale and eyes fearful. She's had trouble before: miscarriages, stillbirths, complications that modern medicine would fix easily. Here, there are no hospitals, no midwives trained in sterile techniques, no painkillers beyond herbal concoctions and a mother's soothing hands. Every pregnancy is a gamble, every contraction a roll of cosmic dice. You sit stiffly on the straw, heart pounding, aware that you are witnessing bravery on a scale you've never imagined. The mother begins preparing a mixture: crushed herbs, honey, and a pinch of dried roots. She whispers incantations as she stirs. You realize these rituals are half superstition, half desperate hope. One slip, one misjudged measurement, and either mother or child could be lost. You notice that she touches the belly gently, speaking softly, her hands tracing invisible patterns that are said to ward off evil spirits and ensure survival. The room smells faintly of sage garlic, and the bitter tang of crushed bark, an aroma that somehow mixes hope and dread. The woman groans, sweat slicking her hair. The mother presses a warm cloth to her back, murmuring encouragement. You watch as the father fidgets nearby, unsure whether to help or step back. In this world, participation is a balancing act: too much interference, and you might harm; too little, and guilt gnaws at you. You try to imagine modern hospitals' alarms, sterile gloves, soft music. This is the opposite: chaotic, intimate, terrifying, yet somehow profoundly human. Hours pass. The woman shakes, body trembling. And the mother applies a poultice of honey, crushed herbs, and a strange-smelling root. She insists it will stop bleeding and protect the unborn child. You taste a fragment of it by accident and gag instantly. Survival, it seems, tastes faintly of regret and bitterness. You remind yourself that these people have eaten worse in winter, just to avoid starvation. Outside, the wind rattles the shutters. You hear a distant cry, another mother perhaps, struggling with winter's cruelty elsewhere. You realize that childbirth is never isolated here. Every life is part of a larger rhythm of survival, each birth echoing with the stories of those who never made it, the whispers of superstition guiding every step, and the raw, unfiltered presence of winter pressing down like a silent judge. The midwife, or rather, the woman in charge, takes a crude instrument to tie the umbilical cord. You flinch as she works, firelight glinting on its sharpened edge. No anesthesia, no antiseptic, only hands steady with experience and prayers whispered under breath. The father watches, wide-eyed, and you notice the humor briefly flicker in his expression. Modern dads wouldn't survive a minute. He mutters under his breath. You can't help but smirk, despite the gravity of the moment. A sudden spasm, a scream, and the child emerges, or in some cases does not. The mother sighs, holding her breath, and you notice that the villagers are no strangers to grief. A miscarriage is mourned quietly, practically, almost invisibly. The mother cleans, wraps, and prays over what remains, acknowledging the loss with solemnity, before returning to the living. You feel a strange mixture of awe and horror, realizing that every day in this winter world requires emotional resilience that you cannot even begin to comprehend. Sometimes, the remedies are stranger still. Villagers speak of charms hung around the mother's neck, mixtures drunk to prevent miscarriage, and rituals performed at specific hours to ensure the child's spirit remains strong. Some require fasting, some require herbs harvested under precise conditions, and some are terrifyingly literal splints, hot stones, and other crude tools to correct the body. You imagine trying to explain this to a modern doctor. They would faint, and possibly call for a hazmat team. The newborn finally cries, shrill and triumphant, and the mother leans back, exhausted, tears mingling with sweat on her cheeks. The cottage breathes with relief. The neighbor woman, still trembling, is given warmth, herbs, and soft encouragement. You sit on the straw, chest tight, aware that the line between life and death has been walked again, this time with nothing but hands, fire herbs, and stubborn hope. By midnight, the cottage is quiet but tense. You notice shadows that weren't there before. Perhaps your imagination, or perhaps the spirits of past children, watching silently. You realize that superstition is not mere nonsense. It is survival psychology, a way to navigate terror in a world where knowledge is incomplete, and danger lurks in every breath of cold, every cough, every winter night. And as you close your eyes, finally, you understand winter is merciless, disease is relentless, and childbirth is a war fought without weapons. If you thought the horrors of hunger and frostbite were the peak of survival, wait until you witness the strange and often disgusting hygiene, sexual dangers, and hidden perils that defined peasant life in these unforgiving winters. A world where every day is a negotiation between survival and despair. You wake to the faint, icy light of dawn seeping through a gap in the shutters, and a quiet tension hangs over the cottage. It is subtle at first, an unease that seems to crawl under your skin. But as you listen, you realize it is more than cold or hunger. Winter has a way of amplifying danger, and in this village, the danger is not only frostbite or rats. It is human, intimate, and relentless. The mother speaks in whispers to the women nearby, cautioning them about the men returning from the fields or the woods. Keep your sleeves tight. Keep your voice soft. Don't wander alone, she murmurs. The children play near the fire oblivious, but the women know that the smallest lapse can bring shame, illness, or worse. Winter makes the world smaller, and in small spaces, rumors, fear, and predation travel faster than smoke. You watch as a young woman fetches water from the well. She wraps her shawl tight, but it barely protects her. You notice the men nearby, some harmless, some with a leer that sends shivers down your spine. The mother mutters something about men who take advantage when hunger and cold weaken the mind. You think you understand, vulnerability is everywhere in winter, and women carry an invisible armor made of caution, awareness, and endurance. Inside the cottage, a neighbor arrives quietly, her hands clasped over her belly. She whispers that she has been forced to service a wealthy landowner to keep the family fed. The winter frost in her words chills you more than the snow outside. You realize that survival often demanded compromise, moral contortions, and sacrifices that bite deeper than hunger. The peasant woman's courage is not in battle, but in enduring indignity for the sake of life itself. You follow her story with fascination and unease. Payment might be food, a bag of grain, a slice of bread, or protection from harsher punishment. Men in power exploit not only the season but the desperation it brings. And the winter, with its unyielding cold and scarcity, becomes a silent accomplice. The girl smiles faintly when she talks, humor flickering in the darkness, as if laughing keeps the shame from crushing her completely. Meanwhile, inside the cottage, another woman rubs ointment into her stomach. She's expecting a child, and she whispers warnings about keeping it safe from the frost, from sickness, from men who do not care. The herbs smell sharp and bitter, masking a fear that words cannot. You notice the children listening, some understanding, most not, but the lessons are absorbed anyway. In winter, safety is scarce, trust is precious, and life is always negotiable. The men return from work, chilled and tired, some staggering slightly from the cold or drink. The women know how to navigate their presence. Smiles measured, eyes wary, conversation light yet alert. A misstep, a glance, a joke misinterpreted can escalate to violence or worse. Winter closes doors and windows, but it cannot close the human appetite for control, for power, for survival at the expense of another. You are drawn to the small humor that persists despite peril. A man trips over the firewood, spilling a bucket of water across the floor. Everyone laughs, briefly, before the tension returns. You realize that humor is the adhesive holding sanity together in these months. Even as the women negotiate danger and men negotiate hunger, laughter becomes a survival tool, subtle, sharp, and essential. And yet, for all the strategy and armor, tragedies occur. A young woman falls ill from the chill after venturing out alone, unable to fetch supplies or avoid exploitation. She coughs violently, her eyes wide with fever and fear. The mother administers herbs, warmth, and a whispered prayer, while you watch, heart clenched. Realizing that winter does not forgive mistakes or weakness. Every decision is a gamble, and sometimes the dice are loaded. By nightfall, the cottage settles into a tense rhythm. The children sleep, exhausted, while the adults move quietly, anticipating the worst yet hoping for the best. You sit near the fire, shivering, thinking about power, vulnerability, and the hidden costs of survival. You understand that winter isn't merely a season here. It's a crucible, exposing human desires, fears, and resilience in equal measure. And just when you think you have seen the full spectrum of danger, wait until you witness how illness, filth, and sexual exploitation intersected in the harshest months, producing situations that were grotesque, tragic, and darkly absurd all at once. Night deepens, and the cottage settles into a precarious quiet. But outside, danger never truly sleeps. You hear the crunch of snow beneath heavy boots, the occasional shout from men returning late from distant fields, and the whispers of villagers warning each other to stay vigilant. The young women huddle together, sharing warmth, advice, and secrets about which men to avoid, which paths to take, and which doors to lock. Survival is as much about cunning as it is about courage. A neighbor coughs violently as she shares her story. A wealthy landowner demanded more than labor this week, promising grain and protection in exchange for intimacy. She whispers the details carefully, aware that walls have ears and reputations are fragile. You feel a shiver, not from the cold. In this world, power is exercised quietly, invisibly, and winter amplifies it. Hunger, desperation, and isolation make vulnerability unavoidable. Inside the cottage, another woman tends to her newborn, while simultaneously keeping watch for unwanted attention. You notice the subtle signals, a shift in posture, a glance toward the door, a hand resting lightly on the hearth's edge. These gestures are learned, instinctive, and essential for survival. Humor flickers again, as one woman jokes about how men think snow makes them invisible. Everyone laughs softly, knowing the joke carries truth. Disease lurks silently behind every shadow. The cramped, poorly ventilated cottages are perfect breeding grounds for fevers, lice, and worse. Sexual exploitation isn't merely a social risk. It's a vector for illness. Winter amplifies exposure, and bodies weakened by hunger and cold succumb easily. You shiver as you notice the mother rubbing a child's rash with herbal paste, whispering, "It's nothing yet." You realize that vigilance is perpetual, relief is temporary. A man arrives at the door, staggering with drink, intent unclear. The women exchange subtle signals and prepare defensive strategies, blocking paths, creating excuses, offering minimal engagement. You watch, fascinated and horrified. Survival requires negotiation, deception, and occasional small sacrifices, all performed under the cold gaze of winter. A misplaced step, a misread gesture, and consequences could be severe. Despite this, life persists. Children play quietly near the fire, laughter soft but defiant. The mother hums an old tune as she tends to herbs and water, maintaining routines that ward off despair. You notice that humor, even dark humor, threads through the tension. One woman jokes about men being slower than frozen pigs, and a small laugh ripples through the group. You realize that laughter is not frivolous. It is a shield, a quiet rebellion against the harshness outside. By midnight, the dangers of winter sexuality, disease, and exploitation converge. The women administer herbal remedies, prayers, and charms, not only for pregnancy and childbirth, but for protection against illness and predatory men. You observe the delicate balance. One wrong move could endanger body, reputation, or life. The night feels alive with invisible threats, yet also alive with resilience. The father checks on the fire while keeping an eye on the door. Every creak of timber, every shadowed movement triggers caution. You notice how instinct guides their interactions, who speaks when, who watches whom, how trust is rationed as carefully as food. Winter is a teacher here, and its lessons are harsh visibility can be danger, isolation is peril, and survival depends on reading the world with unerring precision. Eventually, exhaustion overcomes vigilance. The women sit together, whispering, sharing stories, planning strategies for the next day. Their resilience is astonishing. Despite hunger, disease, exploitation, and cold, they endure. They joke quietly, plan cautiously, and rest only enough to rise again, ready to face the merciless rhythm of winter. And as you lie on straw near the fire, reflecting on the day, you realize that winter's true cruelty isn't only cold, hunger, or illness. It is the relentless combination of all these pressures, forcing humanity into moral compromises, quiet heroism, and strategies that are as inventive as they are grim. If you think the danger, misery, and resourcefulness of winter is contained within cottages and fields, wait until you experience the hidden horrors of filth, lice, and disease that infest every corner of peasant life, turning survival into a daily battle against the invisible armies crawling over your skin. The first thing you notice when you wake is the smell. Not the sweet, comforting scent of a fire or cooked food, but a heavy, clinging odor that sticks to your hair, your clothes, your skin, your very thoughts. It is a combination of sweat, unwashed bodies, smoke, rot, and something else. Something creeping beneath the surface, subtle but relentless. This is winter in a peasant village. The cold drives you inside, and inside, cleanliness is a luxury few can afford. You swing your legs over the edge of the straw bed and immediately feel the itch. A crawling sensation, faint at first but insistent. You scratch, grimacing, and notice the tiny black dots in the folds of your sleeve. Lice, hundreds, perhaps thousands, invisible armies patrolling the landscape of your body. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the realization that your skin is a battlefield. And yet, scratching only spreads the little monsters faster, as if they are mocking your attempts at control. The mother is already up, moving quietly through the cottage, hands busy with herbs and rough cloths. She murmurs to herself about boiling water, raking out straw, and fumigating the worst corners. You watch, fascinated, as she sweeps crumbs, ashes, and hair into a pile, then tosses a pinch of crushed herbs on top. It keeps them at bay, she says, nodding at the lice crawling across your sleeve. You think about modern shampoos with fancy names and promises, and feel a pang of envy. Here, survival is literal, tactile, and disgusting. The children wake slowly, rubbing sleep from their eyes, immediately scratching and swatting at their own infestations. You notice that the youngest seems to giggle through it, unaware of the horror beneath the laughter. The older children, however, are silent, deliberate, methodical in their morning rituals of brushing, plucking, and scrubbing as best they can with cold water and coarse cloth. You realize quickly in this village, survival isn't just about food, fire, or warmth. It's about staying one step ahead of the creatures you cannot see. You step outside, hoping the cold will distract from the itch, and immediately regret it. Snow crunches beneath your boots, frozen mud clings stubbornly, and the wind carries scents from nearby cottages, smoke, sweat, and faintly, the unmistakable tang of unwashed bodies pressed close together. You notice that even the animals are affected. Chickens peck nervously at the straw, pigs shuffle sluggishly, and the dog, bless its fur, scratches at fleas with a vengeance that makes you shiver. Every living creature in the village seems to carry its own ecosystem of tiny, merciless parasites. The father appears grim-faced, carrying a bucket of water. He begins pouring it over straw, washing the corners, trying to keep the worst smells and infestations at bay. You notice the humor flicker briefly in your mind. Modern sanitation workers have it easy. Here, everyone is janitor, exterminator, and pest control rolled into one, working tirelessly with no hope of truly winning the war. You gag slightly as the water hits, churning the smell of rot and smoke into something even more pungent. By mid-morning, the village square is alive with activity. People shuffle about, wrapped in layers, brushing snow from shoulders, picking lice, and swatting fleas. You notice the subtle social etiquette of infestation. Nobody points it out openly. Nobody shames the other. Survival is collective, understanding that these pests respect no boundaries, and shame accomplishes nothing. You glimpse a child whispering to another, sharing tips on where the worst clusters hide. Behind the ears, under collars, along the neckline. You smile despite yourself. The ingenuity of children knows no hygiene. Inside, the cottage smells of ash, herbs, and sweat. layered over the pervasive stench of bodies pressed together in the cold. You follow the mother as she moves through the motions of washing, scraping skin with rough cloths, boiling herbs in water to fumigate beds, shaking blankets until feathers and lice fly into the air like tiny black snowflakes. You realize that cleanliness is an ongoing battle, fought with nothing more than elbow grease, superstition, and a stubborn refusal to surrender to filth. The fire flickers as a neighbor arrives, coughing, carrying a small sack of something vaguely organic. You recoil slightly as she dumps it into the corner: herbs, dried leaves, and the occasional small bone, intended to ward off lice, fleas, and disease. She chuckles faintly at your expression. "It works," she says. You want to believe her, but your nostrils flare in protest. You think of modern insecticide, sprays, and powders, and feel a pang of longing for air fresheners and scented soaps. By afternoon, the toll of winter filth is undeniable. Skin itches, eyes water, and hair tangles in knots that harbor tiny invaders. You watch as the villagers cope, scratching, plucking, bathing in cold water when they can, boiling herbs for fumigation, and using crude comms to extract the pests. Humor persists, sharp and necessary. Someone jokes that the lice are winter's gift that keeps giving, and a small chorus of laughter follows, a brief reprieve from the relentless discomfort. You notice that laughter is as crucial as fire or food. It is a shield against despair, invisible but effective. The children play in corners, oblivious to the full horrors of infestation. But you watch as they mimic their parents, combing hair, inspecting for clusters, and whispering secrets about hiding spots. The parents supervise silently, knowing that these lessons are critical for survival. Winter is not forgiving, and ignorance is costly. Even a small infestation can weaken a body, spread disease, and make survival impossible. By evening, the cottage is a blur of movement, scrubbing boiling water, fumigating, and whispering prayers over beds. The father shakes blankets outside, sending feathers and debris flying into the snow. The mother rubs herbs into her hair and scalp, muttering protective charms. You feel simultaneously disgusted and awed, realizing that hygiene here is an art form of endurance, ritual, and clever improvisation. As night settles, the smell of sweat, ash, and herbs lingers. The children are finally asleep, bodies exhausted, and the adults settle near the fire, scratching, rubbing, and whispering in quiet amusement about who is the most infested. You laugh softly at the absurdity, acknowledging that humor is essential, even when the world seems intent on overwhelming you with discomfort. Finally, you lie down on straw, feeling the lingering crawl of lice and fleas beneath layers of clothing. You close your eyes, realizing that winter filth is not just physical. It is psychological, a test of patience, endurance, and humor. Survival demands constant vigilance, small victories against crawling enemies, and the ability to laugh even when your scalp is on fire. And just when you think the horror of lice, fleas, and perpetual filth is the worst winter can throw at you, wait until you see how these conditions intersect with disease, hunger, and the subtle social pressures that shape every moment of peasant life, turning survival into a grotesque, exhausting, and strangely humorous dance. The first thing that hits you in the morning is hunger, not a polite, mild rumble that can be ignored, but a gnawing, hollow ache that seems to eat through your bones. Winter has been long, stores are low, and the fire, though crackling, cannot fill the belly. You shuffle to the corner where a small pot simmers over the embers. It smells faintly of something edible, or at least you hope it is edible. Inside the pot you see gruel, thin, watery, laced with bits of root, occasional scraps of grain, and a splash of whatever milk could be spared. You stir it cautiously, tasting a spoonful and grimace. It is bitter, gritty, and faintly sour, yet it is sustenance, and in winter, sustenance is triumph. The children hover, whining softly, faces pale and lips cracked. Hunger is contagious. You almost laugh at the absurdity, thinking about modern breakfast cereals, syrup, and coffee that makes mornings tolerable. Here, survival is measured in bitterness and grit. The father returns from the forest, boots caked with frozen mud, carrying a small bundle. Inside you discover a few roots, perhaps a turnip, slightly bruised but firm enough to boil. You all gather around, eyes wide, noses twitching at the earthy aroma. Even these humble vegetables are a treasure, and each bite is a victory against starvation. You notice humor flicker when one child pokes at a small slug that had sneaked in among the roots. The mother shoos it away, muttering, "Winter is cruel, but we don't eat everything." You smile despite the circumstances. Sometimes survival has limits. By mid-morning, the village square buzzes with quiet desperation. Neighbors barter whatever they can, a handful of grain for a small hunk of cheese, dried fish for a root, and occasionally, bread so hard it could double as a weapon. You observe the subtle negotiation rituals, bargaining with gestures, eye contact, whispered threats, and occasional jokes to ease tension. Hunger is a shared language, one that binds everyone in mutual understanding of the season's cruelty. Inside the cottage, the mother begins preparing a soup. It is thin, watery, and vaguely nutritious, made from scraps of meat, dried beans, and herbs that smell faintly of the forest. You stir it carefully, trying not to gag at the chunks of meat that seem more sinew than flesh. The humor of the moment sneaks in as the father grumbles about stew that could double as cement. You can't help but chuckle quietly. Dark humor is a seasoning of its own in this bitter winter. By afternoon, extreme measures are apparent. Some families ration flour so tightly that each slice of bread is a treasure. Others scrape frost, bitten vegetables from the garden, boil old potatoes, or in the worst cases, boil bark and roots to extract a faint semblance of nutrition. You taste a piece of bark boiled for hours and nearly gag. It is dry, fibrous, bitter beyond comprehension. Yet someone smiles faintly and calls it forest bread. You marvel at human ingenuity and desperation. Hunger drives creativity and moral compromise alike. You hear whispers about scavenging for scraps from abandoned barns, stealing a few grains from neighbors, or trading favors, sometimes sexual favors, for food. The winter has warped necessity into survival ethics. Anything edible becomes currency, and every morsel is precious. You notice the faint humor when someone jokes about eating the dog before the cat, though everyone knows the underlying truth is grim. By evening, the cottage smells of boiled roots, stale bread, and faintly of smoke from the fire. You sit on straw, spooning gruel into your mouth, noting how flavors that would be revolting in summer are almost tolerable now. Hunger alters perception, and necessity is the fiercest seasoning of all. Children lick their bowls clean, parents do the same, and a fragile, shared satisfaction settles over the room. The night is long and cold, and hunger gnaws at the edges of consciousness. You imagine modern supermarkets, shelves overflowing with colorful packaging, and feel a pang of disbelief that survival ever depended on scraping roots, foraging frost, bitten vegetables, and rationing scraps. Here, every bite is earned through labor, negotiation, and endurance. Humor persists, subtle and dark. The mother mutters about stew strong enough to build houses, and the father jokes about a turnip's potential as a weapon. You smile despite yourself. By midnight, small triumphs emerge. A neighbor shares a loaf of bread baked last week, hard but nourishing. Children huddle close to the fire, warmth filling empty stomachs with fleeting comfort. You notice the quiet pride in every parent's eyes, the same pride that has carried villages through centuries of cruel winters. Food is survival, but it is also hope, and in winter, hope is as precious as firewood. And as you finally lie down, stomach only half full, you realize that this is only the beginning. If you thought hunger and desperate diets were the worst winter could offer, wait until you experience the hidden horrors of spoiled food, rot, and the grotesque improvisations that peasants endured to avoid starvation, where every meal carries both life and risk. The morning greets you with a smell that is impossible to ignore. Not smoke, not fire, not the faint bitterness of boiled roots, but something sharper, fouler, a scent that curls around your stomach and makes you gag even before you see it. Spoiled food. In winter, the cold preserves little, storage is crude, and scarcity forces choices that are both desperate and dangerous. You find a small barrel of meat, grey at the edges, slimy in texture. The mother examines it carefully, sniffing, poking, muttering curses at the gods for testing their patience. You step back, realizing that survival often means choosing between risk and certain hunger. Children hover around scraps, their hands tiny and fearless. You notice a girl daringly tear at a piece of hardened, partially rotten bread, eyes wide with both hunger and fear. The mother swoops in, waving her hands, shouting about poison and sickness, but the girl is already chewing. You watch in horror and fascination, understanding that winter forces compromises that would be unthinkable in summer. The risk of rot is real, yet so is the gnawing emptiness of stomachs. Hunger overrides caution, and sometimes survival is measured in spoiled bites and trembling hope. By mid-morning, whispers of illness float through the village. Fevers, coughs, rashes. You notice a neighbor clutching her belly, her skin flushed and damp with sweat. She drank a weak soup yesterday, probably contaminated, and now the consequences are clear. Disease spreads faster than snowdrifts in winter, moving silently from cottage to cottage, infecting those already weakened by frost, hunger, and exhaustion. You realize that winter is not merely a season. It is a medium for contagion, a cold and invisible vector that exploits every vulnerability. Inside the cottage, the mother scrapes out a pot, discarding chunks of moldy vegetables and rotten meat. You notice a faint humor in her movements, a bitter jokey, better a spoonful of gruel than a week in the grave. You want to laugh, but the smell makes it impossible. You step outside, grateful for the frost air, though the cold only bites at your fingers and face, reminding you that comfort is always temporary. The children play quietly near the fire, though their laughter is muted by stomach aches and coughs. You notice how even the simplest meals carry danger. A turnip left in a corner too long, a small barrel of grain damp from condensation, a loaf baked imperfectly and allowed to sit. Each imperfection can produce sickness, yet the alternatives, hunger, starvation, are worse. You marvel at the balance villagers strike between risk and necessity, understanding that every bite carries both life and potential death. By afternoon, illness becomes unavoidable. You witness a neighbor doubled over, vomiting, skin pallid. The mother applies herbs and poultices, muttering prayers and incantations over the girl. You flinch at the smell, bitter, medicinal, and slightly rotten, a perfume of desperation and care. The children watch silently, some curious, some afraid, learning the rituals of survival that will guide them through winters for decades to come. Humor persists. Faint and grim, someone whispers that the soup today might take us all, and a small laugh follows, a brief reprieve in the oppressive gloom. The father returns from the woods, boots caked in mud and frost, carrying a small bundle of roots and a rabbit, half dead from cold. The meat is questionable, the rabbit small, but in winter, it is sustenance, a prize worth the risk of disease. The mother prepares it carefully, boiling it for hours and adding herbs, inspecting constantly for anything that might carry rot or sickness. You taste a piece, grimacing at its toughness, yet feeling a faint warmth spread through your stomach. Survival is never pleasant, it is always compromise, effort, and endurance. By evening, the cumulative effect of spoiled food, hunger, and cold is undeniable. Coughs, fevers, and rashes echo through cottages. You notice a subtle hierarchy of resilience. Those with stronger bodies, more knowledge of herbs, or more cautious habits survive better. Children mimic adults, rituals inspecting, tasting cautiously, applying herbs, avoiding risky bites. The lessons are instinctive, learned in a school where the curriculum is suffering, observation, and hope. Nightfall brings a grim rhythm. The fire crackles, smoke curling in lazy spirals, while the villagers tend to the sick, prepare what little food remains, and whisper warnings. You notice subtle humor flickering in quiet conversations. Someone mutters that the gruel is probably plotting against us, and a faint chuckle ripples through the group. Humor here is an invisible shield, a necessary weapon against despair, filth, and death. As you lie on straw, stomach only half full, you reflect on the grotesque reality of survival. Winter transforms everything ordinary into a risk water that could carry illness, food that could kill, warmth that might be insufficient. You realize that survival is measured not in comfort or abundance, but in ingenuity, endurance, and the capacity to face daily horror without surrender. And just when you think winter has exhausted its arsenal, wait until you witness how filth, hunger, and disease intersect with superstition, fear, and the constant threat of death, producing moments both horrifying and darkly absurd. A world where every breath carries risk, and every survival tactic is a testament to human resilience. The morning breaks slowly, pale light struggling through frost-lined windows, casting long shadows over the cottage. You wake to a quiet that is almost deceptive, a lull before the inevitable stirrings of survival. The fire sputters, throwing warmth unevenly across the straw-strewn floor, and the smell of last night's gruel, faintly sour now, lingers stubbornly. Winter has been long relentless, and you feel the weight of it pressing on your shoulders, bones, and spirit. You rise, brushing straw from your clothes, and step carefully over the children still asleep in corners. Their faces are pale, eyes closed, lips chapped, small bodies curled against the cold. Survival has demanded more than warmth or food. It has demanded endurance, courage, and a strange, unyielding humor that persists even when hope seems thin. You notice the faint smile of one child as she shifts in her sleep, perhaps dreaming of spring, perhaps dreaming of bread. The mother is already moving, tending the fire, arranging herbs, and stirring the last of the thin soup. She glances up at you with eyes that are wary but alert. Every gesture is precise, economy of motion honed by decades of winters like this. You realize that endurance is learned, passed down, a rhythm of motion that has nothing to do with choice, and everything to do with necessity. The father emerges from the corner, stretching, rubbing frostbite from his fingers, and muttering about the stubbornness of wood smoke and uncooperative livestock. You can't help but smile at the familiarity of it, a humor sharpened by shared struggle. Outside, the village begins to stir. Figures shuffle through snow, carrying buckets of water, bundles of firewood, and meager stores of grain. The smell of smoke, sweat, and frozen earth combines into a pungent perfume of survival. You notice subtle interactions, whispers about who is sick, who is hiding food, who has caught a rabbit, and who has returned empty-handed. Winter is a social as well as a physical battle. Alliances, rivalries, and shared toil blend into a continuous negotiation of existence. By mid-morning, you see the layers of survival unfold. Women tend fires, cook scraps, and watch children with one eye, while inspecting for lice and other pests with the other. Men chop wood, carry water, and patrol for signs of danger, whether predator, neighbor, or frostbitten tree limb. Children mimic the adults, learning rituals of hygiene, resourcefulness, and humor, tiny apprentices in the school of endurance. Even in the misery, small triumphs emerge. A fire that burns steadily, a pot of gruel that is barely bitter, a child's laugh that rises above the cold. You notice the small absurdities that make this world bearable. Someone jokes that the snow outside is a conspiracy against clean feet, and a faint chorus of laughter follows. The father grumbles about the cat stealing scraps and mutters that even rodents have better luck than we do. Humor, you realize, is not incidental. It is a survival tactic, a psychological barrier against despair, filth, and frostbite. By afternoon, sickness and exhaustion begin to make themselves felt. You see neighbors coughing, rubbing rashes, and tending minor injuries with herbs and whispered prayers. Disease has never been more tangible than in this frozen landscape. The cold weakens bodies, hunger compromises immunity, and close quarters allow illness to leap from one cottage to another with terrifying ease. Yet resilience persists. The sick are cared for, meals are shared, and laughter, subtle and sardonic, threads through the fear. The fire flickers as the day wanes. The children play quietly, careful not to disturb the fragile equilibrium of the cottage. You watch as the mother wraps a child in a blanket, brushing straw from hair and muttering charms to ward off lice and illness. You notice the careful choreography of motion: I scrape, bowl stir, whisper, laugh, repeat. Every action has weight, every gesture matters. Even humor is deliberate, a vital thread connecting the living to sanity in a winter that tests both. Night settles fully, and the cottage breathes in the quiet rhythm of survival. You sit near the fire, muscles aching, stomach half full, and reflect on the weeks, months, and perhaps years this winter has demanded. Hunger, cold, disease, exploitation, filth, all have carved themselves into your consciousness. And yet, life persists. Children sleep, women tend fires, men carry wood, and somewhere outside, snow continues to fall relentlessly, indifferent to effort or suffering. You notice the subtle victories: a pot of soup that nourishes rather than poisons, a blanket that provides warmth through the night, a story whispered to ease fear, a laugh shared in darkness. Survival is cumulative, 1,000 small successes, unnoticed by the world, yet monumental in the struggle to endure. Winter does not care for heroics, only persistence. And the villagers, you realize, are masters of persistence, their humor, courage, and ingenuity intertwined with every breath they take. As you finally lie on straw to rest, you reflect on the bitter sweetness of it all. Winter is merciless, cruel, and unrelenting. Hunger, disease, cold, and danger press on every side. Yet amid the horror, filth, and fear, there is endurance, wit, and human ingenuity. You think of the children learning survival, the parents guiding them, the neighbors sharing scarce food, and the tiny rituals that maintain life. You realize that every day is a victory, and every night a reprieve earned through labor, vigilance, and courage. And just as your eyes close, you catch the faint whisper of tomorrow's struggle. Firewood must be chopped, food rationed, the frost beaten back, and the crawling lice and invisible threats faced once more. You understand now that winter does not end. It only pauses, allowing you to breathe, eat, and laugh. However faintly, before the cycle begins again. You drift into sleep with a profound respect for those who endured it, knowing that survival in a medieval winter is not measured by comfort or abundance, but by the stubborn refusal to surrender to cold, hunger, disease, and despair. And as you dream, faint laughter and the smell of smoke and gruel linger, a testament to life persisting against every imaginable obstacle.